want to talk about love. And Tom and I decided if we were going to develop a theory about love and write a book about love, then we wanted to find out everything we possibly could about what love was. What I found is romantic love started at the end of the 11th, the early 12th century. This is when the Crusades were being fought. So if you will remember your world history, the rich guys in Europe had to go fight the Crusades, leaving their ladies in waiting. That's where we get that term, ladies in waiting, in the courts. So now these rich aristocratic ladies are waiting in the courts, and they have no one to take them to parties or to dances or to soirees, so they're bored. So they need entertainment. Well, the troubadours enter from the south of France, and the troubadours are basically teenage sons of the wealthy French noblemen who come into town, and they have guitars, and they have these beautiful horses. You've seen pictures in books. They look like, you know, musketeers or knights, and they come into town and they sing these ladies love songs. So they're courting. That's where they come to the courts. We get our term courting. And so they're coming to the courts, and these ladies are identifying their suitors or their swains, looking down from the castles and dropping flowers or handkerchiefs. So these guys are singing them love songs. Now, it's based on a myth. It's based on wanting and longing, because they could never have a relationship with these ladies, because in those days they'd have gotten the rack or the torture chamber. So we now have a society that mates by romantic love. We're going to teach couples everything we can about the theories of romantic love.
So let's look at the theories of romantic love and see if we can begin to understand some of this. The first one, as you see in your workbook there, is called the theory of Eros. Eros, as you know, is one of the Greek words for love. And Eros is actually described as the burning embers of passion between a man and woman. It is sensual and sexual in nature. We might call it physical attraction, perhaps even lust. This tends to be the litmus test in our culture for being in love. Do we have that romantic attraction? Do we have that feeling for one another that heightens our senses? You know, the sky is bluer, the grass is greener, you don't eat, you don't talk, you don't sleep. You know, you just want to spend time together. And we call that feeling, that sensual, sexual feeling, love. And in our culture, we are sold out to this feeling. We have to have this feeling in order to be in love, and we call that feeling being in love, you see. And here's the dilemma. If love is a sexual, sensual, physical attraction we have for one another, and we have to have that feeling in order to be in love, then what do you call it when you no longer have that feeling? Well, in our culture, we say, well, I don't love him anymore. I mean, how many times have we heard in our offices, I just don't love him anymore. I just don't have that feeling, you know. And what they're talking about is this sexual, sensual tension, this feeling they have for one another that they call love. And it's the necessary ingredient in our culture. And rather than understand that this is perhaps falling in love at best, you know, or infatuation. Bev has a term I like even better. She calls it tripping into infatuation. I think that's much closer to the truth about this sexual, sensual feeling. But rather than come to our senses and say, wait a minute, that's probably the initial attraction, but certainly that's not long-term love, you see. Rather than come to that awareness, our culture goes the other way. There are powers that be that are trying to transform the basic marriage vows that traditionally say we will be each other in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer, till death do we part. To say now that we will be together until we no longer love each other. And what that does, see, is it opens up to this mystical, sexual, sensual feeling we call love. That's a necessary ingredient for relationships. And when we don't have that feeling, we're free to step out of the relationship and start that process all over again. And what we're doing in our culture then is setting up a scenario of what we call serial monogamists that go into a relationship with that sexual, sensual feeling called love. When they no longer feel it, they exit that relationship and start the process all over again. And we've got to begin to understand what real, true love is all about.
There's a biochemical reason too for this overwhelming attraction. When you are tripping into infatuation or falling in love, there are chemicals that are released in the brain that actually get dumped into the system, and they actually call these chemicals the love cocktail. And it's composed of dopamine, which is like a driver that's present in addictions, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and those give you the excitement, you know, kind of the, oh, this is so exciting and wonderful, and phenylethylamine, which is a chemical cousin to speed. So basically, you really have a great high going when you're falling in love. The problem with the high, like any high, is it's delusional and it's illusional. So you actually make this person larger than life. This is when people say, well, he's got a temper, and you say, he's just passionate. He's just a passionate person, or he's cheap. And frugality is a good quality. And you end up reframing their qualities because these chemicals cause you to see them in the most positive light. Now, the bad news is, the good news is that these chemicals are like speed. The grass is greener, the sky is bluer, I can accomplish anything. You know, you just feel superhuman. The bad news is, like any chemical, the body builds up a tolerance to it. So after a while, it takes more and more to get love's special kick. And after about 4 years, phenylethylamine wanes, and then all of a sudden they turn into a mere mortal.
And about 10 years ago, I think, Bev began to read this book that really intrigued me. A book written by Harville Hendricks called Getting the Love You Want, that dealt with this theory he called Imago. Imago is Latin for image, or image of. And Harville said there's this unconscious template, this pattern of characteristics that was a compilation of the positive and negative characteristics of our primary caretakers that stayed in the unconscious mind. And as we begin the process of mate selection, this imago emerges. And we will be married or attracted to someone who has the highest correlation of characteristics with these positive and negative characteristics of our caretakers. In essence, we marry someone who is most like mom and dad, because mom and dad have primary influence in our lives in those early developmental years. We're attracted to these characteristics in the unconscious mind. Harville said because of what he called the repetition compulsion, the unconscious need to reproduce the environment of our own childhood with the characteristics of those caretakers in order to either meet the needs that were met in that family of origin or heal the wounds of the needs that were not met. And as I read that and as we began this training, I began to realize that really develops a fundamental dilemma in relationships, which goes something like this. If we're married to someone who has a high correlation of positive characteristics, then there's a very high likelihood that the positive needs that were met will be met again in that relationship. But the other side of that equation is true also, and that is if we are attracted to someone who has a high correlation of negative characteristics, and those negative characteristics wounded us, then there's an overwhelming potential in the relationship we're in to be wounded again. We've been training for many years now in terms of imago therapy, and it's amazing to me that I've worked with hundreds of couples in that time, and very rarely do I ever see a couple where this imago attraction is not true. It's an unconscious homing device that draws us to characteristics like mom and dad so that we can meet the needs that were not met and heal the wounds in our relationships.
Then the last theory is the theory of projection. In a nutshell, negatives and positives are attracted to one another. Men and women, maleness is attracted to femaleness, and basically Carl Jung was kind of the developer of the theory, or the originator of the theory, and he said that God is both male and female. And so when God made male and God made female, their desire for oneness and growth together was most like God. So a husband and a wife together, if they will really grow, will become most like God. So I thought that's a great aspect of the theory. But he goes even further to say that opposites attract. So the shy person who is kind of withdrawn and will be strongly attracted to the life of the party. And when they're with the life of the party, they will feel like, wow, something in me, I feel whole and complete. This is a part of me I never knew I had before. This is awesome. And the guy who maybe has 2 left feet will get out on the dance floor because he just feels like all of a sudden he can do this. So this is where you get that feeling of you complete me, or I feel whole in your presence, which is a wonderful aspect of falling in love. But Carl Jung takes it even one step further and says, those things within us that got wounded, we say wounded out of you, the things that were a part of who you are that you lost, the lost parts, the wounded parts of you, you will find in a partner. And they will have those qualities and characteristics, and you will definitely feel as if you're being healed.